Hello, dear friends. What you're about to experience was created just for this channel. Every word, every scene, every emotion is completely original. Let's begin. Part 1. She left me with $5. Now she'll wish she left me with nothing. My name is Helen Marston. I'm 64, and 8 days ago, I was left on the side of the road with nothing but a plastic grocery bag and a $5 bill. That's not a metaphor. That's not some poetic exaggeration. That's what my daughter-in-law handed me, 5 crumpled dollars and a bag with a nearly expired sandwich and a bottle of water, before she slammed the car door and drove off, leaving me outside a gas station 2 towns away from my own home. I stood there for nearly 2 hours in my navy coat, clutching the bag like it was an anchor in a storm. People came and went, glanced at me with suspicion or pity or indifference, but no one asked why a woman my age was just standing there, clearly waiting for someone who was never coming back. My phone was gone. She'd taken it. Said she'd hold onto it so I wouldn't get confused and call random numbers again. I don't even know what story she told my son to make this okay, if she told him anything at all. I had no keys, no wallet, just that $5 bill, and the chilling realization that this had been planned, carefully, methodically, cruelly. She'd insisted on taking me to my doctor's appointment that morning, smiled as she loaded me into the car, even held the door for me, then made a turn I didn't recognize, pulled into the parking lot of that gas station, and said, "Actually, this is where you're getting out." At first I thought she was joking. I laughed. I said, "Very funny, Claire," but her face didn't change. She reached into her purse, pulled out the $5, and said, "This should be enough for lunch. Don't be dramatic, Helen." Then she added, like it was some afterthought, "We'll talk soon," and just drove away. I watched the taillights disappear into the distance like it was part of some nightmare. I'd wake up from any minute, but I didn't. I walked. For hours. My knees screamed. My shoes blistered, but I walked. Eventually, a woman at a laundromat let me use the store's phone. I called a number I still remembered by heart, my old neighbor, Janice. She picked me up, didn't ask too many questions, just took me back to her place and made me tea. I stayed there. I'm still here. And then 8 days later, Claire texted. She texted Janice's phone, since that's the number my son must have given her. No apology, no explanation, just 5 words. "It's not that deep, Helen." I stared at that message for a long time, longer than I should have, and then something in me flipped. She thought this was done. She thought I was weak, broken, disposable. She thought I'd be too embarrassed to fight back. Too tired, too old. But she forgot who I was before I became a mother, before I became a quiet woman in the corner of family photos. Claire made one very costly mistake. She underestimated me. I didn't respond to Claire's message. I didn't need to. Instead, I asked Janice if I could borrow her laptop. She gave me a look, half curious, half worried, and handed it over without a word. That night I sat at her kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and typed like my fingers had been waiting 20 years for permission. The first thing I did was open my old email account, one I hadn't used in years, but still remembered the password to. There were 68 unread messages, mostly junk, but 4 of them were from a woman named Catherine Linwood. I hadn't thought about her in a long time. She used to be my business partner before I gave it all up to focus on family. We'd run a small import company together. Nothing flashy, but it had grown fast and had potential. I'd walked away when my son was born. I thought I was choosing what mattered. Catherine had bought out my share, but I knew her. She would have kept records, maybe even offers. She always said, "If you ever change your mind, I'll be waiting with a chair at the table." And suddenly, that line didn't feel sentimental. It felt strategic. I clicked her most recent message. It was from 3 months ago. The subject line said, "Are you okay?" And the body was simple. "I heard what happened. If you need anything, I'm here." My hands trembled. What did she hear? I called her. She answered on the second ring, and the moment I said Catherine, she gasped like she'd just seen a ghost. I asked her straight, "What do you know?" There was a pause. Then she said, "Helen, your daughter-in-law came to me." That hit harder than I expected. She said you were having memory issues, that you needed a conservator, that you wanted someone to handle your estate. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She continued. She said you'd signed everything over to her. She even showed me paperwork, but it didn't feel right, so I never acted on it. I closed my eyes, tried to steady my breathing. Did she try to sell my stake? I asked. She tried, Catherine said softly, but I knew better. I still have your original paperwork. Helen, what's going on? I told her I'd explain soon, but first, I needed something from her. Access to my old records, to the accounts, to the numbers Claire didn't know existed. Catherine didn't hesitate. Within 20 minutes I had what I needed: login credentials, old invoices, and more importantly, the trust documents. I'd had Catherine store years ago in case of a worst-case scenario. I never imagined that scenario would be my own family turning on me like a pack of wolves. But here we were. Claire thought she'd erased me, but she forgot the most important thing about people like me: we don't disappear. We wait, quietly, carefully, and then we move. The next morning, before the sun even came up, I slipped out of Janice's guest room and walked to the all-night cafe 2 blocks down. I needed to think somewhere quiet, somewhere no one knew me. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu: a plain coffee and a slice of toast, and paid with the same $5 bill Claire had left me. I kept the receipt. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted proof, not of how little I had, but of how far I'd come with almost nothing. I sat at the back booth, pulled out my notebook, and started planning. Not just a response, but an undoing. See, Claire thought I was an old woman with no connections, no options, and no memory. She forgot I used to handle 7-figure contracts while raising a toddler and cleaning up after a husband who thought business was just a hobby I'd grow out of. She forgot I was the one who used to negotiate our mortgage rate, balance 3 vendors into languages, and calm angry suppliers before breakfast. She thought I'd let it all rot while she staged some low-rent coup with forged signatures and crocodile tears. But I had contacts. I had history. I had one hell of a paper trail. That day, I called 3 people. Each of them owed me favors. None of them had ever met Claire. By dinner, I had a lawyer who specialized in fiduciary fraud, a forensic accountant who used to work for the IRS, and a quiet but brilliant notary who was willing to examine the documents Claire had supposedly presented on my behalf. I didn't have a home, a car, or even my own phone, but I had strategy. And when you've been underestimated long enough, planning your comeback becomes second nature. I never told Janice what I was doing, not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed this to be clean. No emotion, no explanations, just results. I started working through every financial tie Claire had to my name. She'd opened a shared account in both our names 2 years ago, just in case anything ever happened. Now that account showed a recent transfer $14,000 to her personal card, 3 weeks before she dumped me on the curb. My name was still listed as co-owner. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2? She changed my mailing address with the bank but forgot to remove my digital access. And mistake number 3, she'd gotten cocky, started paying for things in her name, under accounts tied to mine. New furniture, a $900 dinner, a spa trip, all within the last month. I took screenshots of every single line, labeled them, forwarded them to the lawyer. Then I called the bank's fraud department and requested an official inquiry. They were slow, polite, but interested. I told them I suspected elder abuse. That phrase changed the tone immediately. They opened a case, issued a freeze, and just like that, Claire's free ride began to buckle. On the 3rd day, I submitted everything, every document, every timestamp, every trace of what she'd done. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just pressed send and waited. 2 days later, the bank froze all associated accounts. The lawyer filed with the county, and that's when Claire finally broke the silence. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She sent me a message that simply read, "You're really doing all this over $5? I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it, because she still didn't get it. It was never about the $5. It was about the woman she thought I'd become. The woman she thought would stay quiet. But I'm not that woman. Not anymore. And that's just the beginning of what Helen uncovered. A $5 betrayal was only the surface. What came next unraveled everything Claire thought she controlled. In part 2, you'll see just how far Helen was willing to go, and who would unexpectedly take her side. Don't miss it. In part 2, she thought I'd stay quiet, but I was just gathering proof. The strange thing about taking back control at my age is how quietly it begins. Not with fireworks or slamming doors, but with silence, with precision, with folders and signatures and appointments made in calm voices. A week after the accounts were frozen, I walked into the county record's office dressed in my best navy coat and heels I hadn't worn in 10 years. I had an appointment with someone who reviewed power of attorney disputes. I didn't bring emotion. I brought evidence. She listened carefully, scanned each document I laid before her. And when I explained how Claire had used forged forms to gain access to funds that were still legally mine, she nodded without surprise. "We've seen this before," she said, softly, "but rarely with someone who's as prepared as you." I thanked her, got the paperwork certified, and left with something I hadn't felt in years: momentum. But Claire wasn't quiet forever. When the utilities on their house were suddenly suspended due to account clarification, she called Janice's phone again. This time I answered. "Helen," she said, overly cheerful, "I think there's been a mix-up with the bank." I said nothing. Let the silence hang until her voice dropped. "I don't know what you're doing, but this isn't necessary. It's making things difficult for everyone." I finally replied. "Good. Difficult is a start." She hung up. But the next day, my son showed up at Janice's. I hadn't seen him in weeks, not since the morning Claire left me on the sidewalk. He looked tired, older, like the weight of pretending everything was fine had started to split his spine. He asked if we could talk somewhere private. We went for a walk down Janice's street, and after 2 blocks he said, "She told me you were forgetting things, that you needed help." That it was better if she handled the money because you weren't keeping up anymore. I asked, and you believed that? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I didn't want to believe it, but I didn't want to confront her either. That told me everything. I handed him a copy of the ledger, the one that showed the transfers, the dates, the accounts. He read it slowly, his mouth tightening as each line confirmed what he hadn't had the courage to admit. Is this real? He asked. It's all real, I said. And now it's legal too. He sat down on the low wall near the church and stared at the ground. Then he whispered something I didn't expect. She said she'd take the kids if I ever crossed her. My heart didn't break, it braced, because I knew exactly what kind of woman would leave her mother-in-law on the street and then use her children as bargaining chips. I told him, you don't have to defend me, but you do have to decide if silence is worth your soul. He didn't answer. But the next morning, Claire got served. I didn't do it to destroy her. I did it to stop her. And if my son couldn't do it for me, then I would do it for myself. Because she'd made one thing very clear: I was only worth what I could give her. And once she thought I had nothing left, she gave herself permission to erase me. So now, I was giving her something back. A trail. A consequence. A message she wouldn't be able to delete. By the time Claire received the papers, I'd already filed for a full forensic review of all accounts she'd accessed since my alleged mental decline. The phrase still made my jaw tighten: how easily people twist your dignity into paperwork when it suits them. I knew she wouldn't go quietly. The first thing she did was call Adam again. And this time, he answered while I was sitting right across from him. I heard her voice rise through the phone. How could you let her do this? She's confused. She doesn't know what she's doing. And then, quieter. You promised me. He didn't respond, just turned the speaker off and stared at the table like he was trying to bury himself in the wood grain. I said nothing. He looked up at me with that old boyish shame in his eyes, the kind I used to see when he broke something and tried to hide it under a blanket. But this wasn't a toy. This was years of marriage, children, property, money, and fear, all twisted into silence. Claire wasn't stupid. She wouldn't confront me in person. She'd go through back channels, try to block what she couldn't disprove. Sure enough, 3 days later I received a letter supposedly from a lawyer accusing me of slanderous behavior and demanding I cease all legal action immediately or face countersuit. I handed it to my own attorney. He smirked as he scanned the letter. This isn't from a practicing firm, he said. The address is real, but the attorney isn't listed with the state. This is a scare tactic. That's when I knew Claire was desperate. She was bluffing. She'd thought I'd panic and drop everything at the first whiff of a threat. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The worst had already happened. I'd already been humiliated, abandoned, dismissed. Everything after that was just reclamation. One morning I took a ride to the house. Not to see her, but to stand outside and look at the place I'd helped them buy. My name was still on the deed. I'd given them the down payment from my retirement when Adam lost his job. No one thanked me. No one even remembered. Until now. I stood across the street, watched Claire carry groceries in alone. No help. No nanny. No husband. Just her and the storm she'd created. She looked over once, saw me, and froze. I didn't wave. I didn't move. I just let her look at me like a mirror she didn't expect to see. Then I turned and walked away. I wasn't there to threaten her. I was there to remind her, I'm not gone. I'm just getting started. After that day, The silence from Claire's side shifted. Not gone. Just colder. Less denial, more calculation. I knew the look in her eyes when she saw me outside the house. It wasn't guilt. It was recognition. She knew she'd underestimated me. And now she was scrambling to decide if she should backpedal or double down. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was her mother, Helen. She said, voice tight and brittle, "I think this has all gotten a little out of hand, don't you?" I didn't answer. She continued, "I know Claire may have overstepped, but dragging family into legal trouble? Do you really want to ruin everything over a misunderstanding?" I waited until she ran out of breath. Then I said calmly, "Tell Claire next time she wants to send a mouthpiece. Pick one with cleaner hands." Then I hung up. I didn't owe anyone politeness anymore. The next morning, I received notification from the county clerk. Claire had submitted a statement requesting mediation. It was supposed to show cooperation, but I saw it for what it was, a stall. She thought she could drag this out until I gave up, until I got tired, until my age became the excuse she could wave around like a white flag. But she was wrong. I wasn't tired. I was awake. I attended the mediation meeting with my lawyer and a copy of every financial transfer sheet. Authorized. Without consent. Claire walked in looking polished, composed, and furious. She sat across from me like we were strangers in a courtroom drama. When the mediator asked if she had anything to say, before we reviewed the documents, she smiled and said, "I think there's been a lot of confusion. I've always tried to take care of Helen. I only wanted what was best for her. I didn't flinch. I just watched her lie like she breathed it." When it was my turn, I placed a single printed email on the table. It was from her to the real estate agent, written the day she moved me out. "We'll be converting her room into a home office. She won't be coming back." The room hadn't even cooled yet. The mediator looked stunned. Claire blinked. Then she said something that stunned even me. "Helen, I thought you didn't know about that." That's when it hit me. She truly believed I'd never catch up. That my age, my grief, my trust had made me invisible. And invisible people, she thought, can't fight back. I leaned in and said, "You were wrong. I was always watching. I just stopped letting it slide." Her smile cracked. I saw her chest rise with shallow breath. That was the first time I realized she was afraid of me now. Not because I yelled, not because I threatened, but because I had proof. And I had the law. And I had nothing left to lose. The final blow didn't come with fireworks. It came in an envelope. A letter from the estate lawyer confirming the freeze on all transfers Claire had made from my accounts over the past year. She was under investigation now, not because I shouted from rooftops, but because I filed. I documented. I waited. That same day, I received a small box at my door. No note, just my old locket, the one she'd taken for safekeeping, and a single $5 bill folded inside. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe she thought it was a peace offering. Maybe she thought it was a joke. But I saw it for what it was. A reminder of where this all began. I placed the bill in a drawer, locked it, and turned the key. Some wars don't end with apologies. They end when the person who underestimated you realizes you're never going back to who you were. And I wasn't. That version of me, quiet, grateful, compliant, she was gone. Claire just hadn't figured that out until now. She thought silence meant surrender. But Helen was never silent. She was watching, documenting, and waiting. And now, the tables are turning. In part 3, Claire's control starts to slip. and someone unexpected finally speaks up. You won't believe who. Part 3. She tried to ruin my name, so I took back everything she stole. The strange thing about standing your ground after being flattened for so long is how quickly people start to look at you differently, not just the ones who wronged you, but the ones who watched it happen and said nothing. After the estate lawyer froze Claire's access, there was a shift, subtle but sharp, like the air changing before a storm. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact in months now waved from their driveways. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years emailed to say she heard what happened and was so proud of how I handled it. But the only reaction that mattered to me came 3 days later when my son knocked on Janice's door with an envelope in his hand and tears in his eyes. He didn't say much, just handed it to me and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." Inside were copies of Claire's texts, ones I'd never seen, messages she'd sent to her sister, mocking me, bragging about how she finally got the old bat out and how Adam was too spineless to stop her. He'd seen them. By accident, she left her tablet open, and suddenly the mask he'd defended for years cracked into pieces he couldn't unsee. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just placed the envelope in my file folder and told him gently, "It's not about punishment, Adam. It's about boundaries. You'll have to decide where yours begin." He sat beside me and said, "She wants to fight. She's furious." I looked him in the eye and said, "Then let her be. She doesn't get my peace anymore." That same night, Claire made her move. A counterclaim, filed at 4:47 p.m., just before the clerk's office closed. She accused me of financial manipulation, of threatening her family, of trying to ruin her reputation out of jealousy. Jealousy. As if all of this had been some theatrical act of spite instead of what it truly was. A woman taking back the life that had been quietly stolen from her inch by inch. My lawyer reviewed the filing and sighed. "She's not trying to win. She's trying to exhaust you." I smiled for the first time in days. "Let her try," I said. "She has no idea how long I've already waited." And so we kept moving. The judge denied her emergency injunction. Her attorney missed a filing deadline. Every move she made collapsed under its own weight because the foundation was never truth, it was ego. She was loud. I was precise. She was dramatic. I was prepared. She underestimated how dangerous it is to corner someone who's already lost everything. Because now I wasn't protecting what I had. I was reclaiming what she thought was discarded. And nothing is more dangerous than a woman with nothing left to protect, except the truth. The more Claire pushed, the more her story unraveled. Every aggressive motion she made in court came with a paper trail. We could trace false bank claims, inflated invoices, duplicate payments to her own sister listed as elder care. When the judge asked her to explain, she smiled like a child, caught with chocolate on her face, and said, "It must have been a mistake." But by then, the courtroom had shifted. Her act of martyrdom didn't land anymore. The woman who'd cried to the court that she was only trying to help her aging mother-in-law now looked like someone who'd built an empire out of someone else's silence. And the silence was over. I sat there, straight-backed in a navy blazer, listening to her stammer while the attorney beside me unfolded each lie one by one. The only moment I felt my heart clench was when she brought up my memory again. "She's forgetful," Claire said. "She often misremembers dates, amounts, conversations." I was just trying to help her stay organized. And then she looked directly at me, like she expected me to crumble under that word. Forgetful. Like she could still shame me into backing down. But I didn't look away. I held her gaze until she blinked. because I remembered everything. I remembered the first time she rolled her eyes at me when Adam wasn't looking. I remembered how she used to take my phone under the pretense of helping me navigate apps and how suddenly my call logs would vanish. I remembered every small slight she delivered wrapped in sweetness. Every family dinner where she shifted the conversation just enough to make me look scatterbrained or frail. That wasn't care. That was conditioning. But not anymore. When court recessed, she walked past me without speaking. But her eyes weren't smug anymore. They were scanning me like I was someone she didn't recognize, and in a way, I wasn't. The version of me she tried to erase didn't exist now. What stood in front of her was the woman who outlived the storm. The woman she left on the street with $5, who came back with files, names, and dates. Because I may not have had much left when she locked the door behind me, but I had time. I had clarity. And now, I had people who were finally listening. After the second hearing, things began to move fast. Claire's reputation, so carefully curated over years of fake smiles and PTA speeches, started to fracture. The woman who once dominated every room with her confidence now hesitated before speaking, glanced over her shoulder, paused before sending messages. Word had spread beyond the courtroom. Her employer quietly suspended her until the matter was resolved. Her sister, who received more than a few of those fake invoices, ghosted her completely. Even Adam's sweet, shaken Adam stopped sleeping at home. But none of that gave me joy, because this was never about revenge. This was about dignity. It was about making sure that every little manipulation, every whispered doubt she tried to plant in my mind, had a spotlight shining on it now. One afternoon, while reviewing documents with my attorney, a paralegal came in holding a manila folder. She said, "This came in anonymously. Inside were photos, copies of receipts, text screenshots, even a voice recording." I didn't recognize the voice at first. It was Claire, speaking low and fast to someone on the phone. She was laughing. "Oh, please," she said. "She's old. She's lucky we let her stay as long as we did. I could have put her in a home and sold the place a year ago. But Adam's such a softie." The rage I thought I'd burned through returned in a quiet wave. Not a fire this time, an ice-cold certainty. There was no going back. I was never going to be the fragile mother-in-law who made peace for the sake of family dinners. That version of me died the day she closed the door behind me. I turned to the attorney and said, "Add it to the file. Everything stays on record." A week later, Claire requested mediation. Her tone shifted. She started using words like miscommunication and emotional misunderstanding. But I knew that tone. I'd heard it when she wanted something when she was still playing. I refused. Politely, firmly. And then I made one final move she never saw coming. I contacted the foundation board where I'd been a silent donor for over a decade, the same one where Claire had recently applied for a seat. I told them I wanted to step out of the shadows, use my name, my full name, with my history, my record, and now my public story. They welcomed me in with open arms. The seat she'd wanted was now mine, not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I wanted to prove to myself and to every woman like me what reclaiming your narrative really looks like. The final court date felt almost quiet. Claire barely made eye contact as she sat down, her once flawless posture now a stiff mask of control. Her lawyer did most of the talking, framing her actions as misguided but well-intentioned. But the judge wasn't buying it. Too many inconsistencies, too many patterns. And too many people had come forward since neighbors, former co-workers, Even a friend of Adam's who admitted Claire had bragged about streamlining the family finances. When the judge ruled that I was entitled to full access to my accounts, retroactive compensation for the funds Claire had mishandled, and a formal restraining order, she didn't even protest. She just sat there, blinking fast, as though trying not to cry. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. After the hearing, Adam approached me in the hallway. His voice shook. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't." And for the first time in years, I believed him. But belief didn't erase what happened. It didn't restore the years I spent doubting myself, or the nights I wondered if I was slipping. So I said, "I hope you take better care of your next home than you did of me," and I walked away. That night, I lit a single candle by my window, made tea, and sat in the stillness of my new place. It was small, modest, but mine. Every lamp, every pillow, every spoon, I had chosen it. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel old. I felt alive. Not because of what I'd won in court, but because I finally remembered who I was before she tried to rewrite me. The woman who survived much worse. The woman who knew her worth. And now, the world knew it too. They thought she'd stay quiet forever. But Helen didn't just speak, she reshaped the entire narrative. The courtroom wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And in part 4, she's not done. There's still one more surprise. And it changes everything. Part 4. She called me dramatic. So I let the whole world hear my side. You'd think that once the court ruled in my favor, once the money was returned, once Claire was out of my accounts, out of my son's house, and out of places she didn't belong, everything would feel finished. But closure doesn't arrive with a gavel. It creeps in slowly, at odd times. Like when you realize your coffee's hot again because you're no longer jumping at every unknown number. Or when your own reflection starts to look like someone you respect instead of someone you tolerate. I didn't expect much more to come of it. But then, 2 weeks after the judgment, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in over 20 years, Evelyn Vance. She was the managing editor of the regional magazine I used to freelance for before I got married, before I dropped everything for family and Claire turned that sacrifice into a weakness. Evelyn said she'd followed the court case, said my name had come up in circles I hadn't walked through in decades. "We're doing a feature," she said, "on financial abuse, on quiet resilience. You don't have to say yes, but your story could help a lot of women." I said yes, not because I wanted to be some kind of symbol, but because I knew that somewhere out there, a woman was holding her breath, wondering if the problem was her memory or her gut. And I wanted her to know she's not alone. The article ran with a headline I didn't choose but secretly loved. She took back what was hers. I thought maybe a few people would read it, maybe a few friends would call. I didn't expect what came next. A flood of messages, emails, letters, strangers thanking me, women I didn't know sharing their own stories, sisters, daughters, mothers who had all been pushed into silence by someone who smiled at them while cutting them down. One letter stood out. It was handwritten. No return address. Just one sentence. "I saw what Claire did to you, and I left before she could do it to me too." I read it twice, stunned. I didn't know who it was from. Not exactly. But I had an idea. Claire always thought she was untouchable. But even snakes shed their skin, and people start to notice what was underneath all along. And then 3 months after everything ended, Adam called. Not to apologize, not to make peace, but to tell me something simple. The kids asked about you, he said. They miss you. I closed my eyes, let the words land. Then I asked, are they safe? He said yes. I said, then bring them next Sunday. I'll have lemon cake waiting. Because that was the thing about being discarded. You get to choose what you carry with you. I didn't need to carry Claire's cruelty. I didn't need to carry shame. I carried the truth, and lemon cake, and a fresh set of keys on my own chain. In a home with no locked drawers and no missing pages. Just peace. And the woman I never should have let fade away. I didn't tell many people about the article. Not the neighbors, not the bridge group, not even Ruth from the garden club who usually knows everything before I do. But somehow the story still made its rounds. I started getting invited to things again, luncheons, speaking panels, even a spot on the local radio hour. I didn't accept most of them. I wasn't chasing a spotlight. I just wanted to walk into the grocery store without someone looking at me like I was a burden, or a fool, or a woman who lost control of her own life. One Tuesday, while I was picking out tomatoes, I heard someone behind me whisper, "That's her." I turned, bracing myself, but it was an older woman in a beige cardigan, her eyes full of something soft. "You helped my daughter," she said. "She read your article and moved out that night." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her, right there in the produce section. Later that week, I got a delivery. No note, no signature, just a small box wrapped in brown paper, and inside a single gold bracelet. I knew that bracelet. It was my mother's. Claire had pawned it during the second year of her marriage to Adam. Claimed she needed it to buy groceries because Adam was between paychecks. I never saw it again. But here it was, polished, restored, and mine. I didn't need a name to know who had returned it. Someone had finally walked away from her. Someone had stopped believing the stories she spun. And someone had chosen to do the right thing. Quietly. That meant more than anything the court could have given me. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. It arrives in the small cracks Claire didn't think anyone would notice. A week after that, I got another message, this time from the local college. Their women's center wanted to create a resource named after me. The Marston Fund, they called it, for elder women facing financial abuse, displacement, or family coercion. I said yes, then cried in the bathroom for 15 minutes. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood something no one ever teaches you in your 60s sometimes. The only way to reclaim your story is to speak it, even when your voice shakes. I didn't hear from Claire again. Not directly. But people talk. One of Adam's former co-workers came into the library one afternoon and lingered near the front desk. Longer than necessary. He didn't check out a single book. Just waited until no one else was around and said, "That boy of theirs. He lives with Adam's sister now. Claire's not in the picture." Then he left. No further explanation. I never asked for one. I didn't need the details. It was enough to know that the child was safe, that someone had drawn a line, that Claire couldn't keep pretending her lies didn't hurt anyone. A month later, I was sitting in my backyard, watching the wind sway through the trees, when I got an email from a publishing house. Small, independent, but real. They had read my article. They wanted to know if I'd consider turning it into a full memoir. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I made tea. Then I cried. Then I said yes. Not because I wanted to be famous, but because maybe, just maybe, my story could be the one someone else reads at 2 a.m. when they're scared. and alone and wondering if it's really as bad as it feels. Maybe they'd see themselves in me. Maybe it would give them the strength to leave sooner than I did. Maybe they wouldn't lose 30 years to silence. The publisher asked if I had any photos from that time. I said no, not because I didn't have them, but because I didn't want to remember myself that way, hollow-eyed, shrinking, smiling in pictures just to survive the moment. Instead, I sent them a photo Ruth had taken last spring, me in my garden, laughing, dirt on my hands, alive in a way I hadn't been in years. That's who I am now. Not the woman left on the street with $5. Not the ghost of a mother-in-law someone tried to erase. I'm Helen Marston, and I'm done being quiet. 3 months later, I stood at the back of a small community center, surrounded by faces I didn't know but who somehow knew me. It was the first reading of my book. Not a huge event, no press, no fanfare, just folding chairs and soft lights and people holding dog-eared copies with highlighter marks and folded corners. When I finished the last page, there was a silence, not awkward, not hesitant, just heavy, full. Then someone in the front row whispered, "Thank you," and it broke whatever dam was holding us all still. People clapped. Some stood. A woman my age came up after and said, "I thought I was crazy until I read your words." I nodded, because I knew that feeling too well. That night, I went home and sat with my tea, staring at the one photo I'd framed in the hallway, the garden shot. My eyes crinkled with joy in it, my hands covered in soil. That's who I had become, the version of myself no one could take from me again. Not Claire, not Adam, not silence. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer owned me. And maybe, just maybe, someone else would see my story and decide to walk out with their $5 and never look back. This story was written and told with deep respect for real-life experiences many older women face in silence. Helen's journey is fictional, but the emotions feeling discarded, underestimated, and finally reclaiming your voice are painfully real for too many. We crafted this video using a digital narrator to bring Helen's voice to life while preserving the dignity and emotion behind her choices. If this story moved you, sharing it or leaving a comment helps us continue telling more stories that speak the truth behind closed doors. And yes, this video was fully written and narrated by AI, but always with a human heart behind every word.